guys. This is the first episode of the Kaizen podcast, so I'm super excited about that. And today's guest, I have Will Drewery. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hey everybody, I'm Will Drewery. I'm the CEO of Diagon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my company and my life and my career journey to get to this point.
Awesome, man. I'm really happy you're here. So first of all, I just want to tell you that I want to start off with your background. I know you have like a lot of experience in tech. You've been in Google. You've been at Tesla. You now have your own company. So I want to start backwards first and start off where this all kind of happened, and how you ended up in this
Yeah, man,
situation.
happy to talk about it. I think, we might have talked about my background. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For people that know, it's a city in the Midwest, Western Pennsylvania, really known to be the steel town. So steel was like the Pittsburgh was the steel capital of the country for like almost a century. Every bridge that was made, all the steel that went into making automobiles and all of that stuff came from Pittsburgh, and the steel mills that came from there. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. My parents are from there. My grandparents grew up there way, way back. My grandparents, great grandparents are from Alabama, which is another steel capital, which a lot of people don't know, like Birmingham, Alabama is. But my parents worked in the steel mills, or at least my dad did. And so my dad was one of 20 kids. I don't know if I ever told you that, but he was number 15 out of 20. So my
Oh wow.
grandfather worked in the steel mills, and it was really kind of customary that all of the kids, at least all the boys, would do the same thing. And so they did that. Worked in fabricating steel products for really just the first part of his career. And unfortunately, like during the 1980s, there was a big exodus of the steel industry, not just from Pittsburgh, but really from the U.S. Like as globalization started to happen, jobs moved out of the area, the steel mills shut down. A lot of the steel manufacturing moved to India and South Korea, and so you had places like Pittsburgh that were kind of left, just with the bag, like not much to do there. And so really that was kind of the backdrop of where I come from and where I was born. And so Pittsburgh at that time in the mid '80s was really kind of a struggling city, with most of the industry leaving the city. There was a lot of poverty. There were drugs, just all the things that you would imagine it comes with that. And so for me and my family, we grew up without a lot of economic means. My dad was out of his job at the steel mill. He was luckily able to find other work as a truck driver. And my mom, she also was able to find work really fast after high school. The two of them were just doing the best that they could with the resources they had. But we grew up in a very like humble family, humble beginnings. And I always just had this interest in knowing like what would Pittsburgh be like if the steel industry didn't take such a hard hit, and if these economically impoverished areas had some kind of opportunity. And so it was really wasn't until much later in life, when I had the opportunity to travel the world, where I got to see, okay, here are examples of ways that other cities are doing this, that I really got to see what Pittsburgh's potential could be. But maybe just kind of going back to that upbringing. I grew up there, went to public schools. Um, my parents were always impressing on me the importance of education. And so I was that kid that was always in the books, like even when my friends and my cousins were
Yeah.
out doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I'll tell people this story sometimes, like a lot of my cousins, I think that they saw the potential in me
Right.
before I even saw it. And so, as a teenager, you just want to do the stuff that all of your friends are doing. So, I want to go out and smoke and drink with them and do all, whatever they were doing. And then one time I remember, my cousin, he just like stopped me and he was just like, nah, you can't come with us.
Oh, really? How old were you at this time?
Probably 12 or 13.
Wow.
I was like the youngest of our cousin group. I told you I got like 20 aunts and uncles, so we got over 100 cousins. And so my cousins were my friends. All my friends were my cousins. And he was just like, "No, you can't come with us, man. You need to go home, study, do something like, but this life ain't for you." And
That's awesome though that he did that.
it is awesome. Like looking back, I have so much respect for him for even, believing that and seeing that in me and saying something about it. But at the time, it can be a really dejecting experience when you're like, hey, all I want to do is hang out with my friends. They don't want to do any of the stuff that I'm doing, and I can't hang out with them. So I remember being really bummed about it that day, but looking back on it, like, yeah, damn, he was right.
Long term, it like completely changed the whole realm of where you
Yeah,
are now.
yeah, totally, man.
That could have easily derailed your whole future.
There were a lot of times, man. It's actually, I get chills sometimes when I look back and think about all the different places where my life could have gotten derailed. And I believe in God, so I think that He really um, found ways to keep me engaged and to make me feel like I wasn't alone. So I was able to really just find friends that were into the same types of things that I was, like really serious about their education. A lot of us are still really like close friends to this day. But that was one of those formative experiences for me growing up in that environment. I feel like I've got my grit from that. I saw how hard my parents had to work to get everything that they had and to do everything that they did. And I also just saw how hard everybody was working. Like this was, a blue collar town where everybody is like really like engaged in physical labor to make their living. And knowing what I get to do today for a living and the fact that I get to do something that I want to do, not something that I have to
Yeah.
do. And it can be mentally taxing, but not as physically taxing as what I've seen my parents and other family members go through. I think that that's a real blessing that I get to pursue my career and my passion in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really awesome. Kind of going back to your parents' physical labor, and then you could kind of see your parents deteriorate throughout the years of continuously doing that over and over. Compared to now, you get to do what you want, you work with your mind, and you get to make a big impact on multiple people. You're giving back in a way, and also making a living off what you enjoy. And I kind of want to touch on one thing that you talked about, which was your friends. Rare that there's people similar to you. How difficult do you think that was, like finding those friends, or did it just come naturally? Like you were just at school and then just randomly fell upon this guy and then you guys liked each other.
It's a good question. I say that like people attract like people. When you find activities that you want to do, whether it's like a robotics club or I was into like chemistry and all types of just like nerdy science
You're an
stuff.
alchemist.
Yeah, alchemist, man. So like you end up finding people that are interested in those same things. And likewise, like if you're, whatever you're into, you like basketball, you get onto the basketball court, you play basketball every day there, you're going to meet the same people that play basketball. You guys become friends, and then you start to attract other people that are like you. And so I realized that in life,
Yeah,
there's this thing
100%.
that's
Yeah.
like an energy that you have, and where you spend your time is really typically where your interests are. And where those interests are, you're really likely to attract other people that are into those same things. And so I really just try to do that, like just throughout life. I've taken that as a value. Um, there are times when I'll meet someone new and want to hang out with them, and then realize like what, this person doesn't represent the values that I represent, and that becomes like a really short-lived relationship. But the
Right.
people that you really vibe with and that have similar interests, similar values, those people will amplify those areas of your life that you want to amplify. And so I'm a really big believer that like if you want to know what a person is like, just look at their friend group, and that will tell you pretty quickly, what type of people do they like to hang around and what do they like to do. So I hope my friend group makes me proud.
Yeah, that's actually something that I never realized that's actually super true, right? Like I know I heard the saying like, you are the person that you hang around with, but I never really thought about it. Like it's easy to just kind of analyze and see who someone's hanging out with, and then you can kind of tell in a way, who they are as well. And kind of stemming back to, you personally, like, you joined the robotics club, for example, and chemistry classes that you enjoyed, and that's how you met the people. In terms of business, like, you currently started your own company now. You started Digon, which is awesome, and it's here in Silicon Valley. And also coming from your background as an African American, you don't really see a lot. I think me and you had that conversation where we don't really see a lot of that in Silicon Valley, right? How difficult has that been, and what's kind of the process into getting into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. You're right. It is really rare, especially here in Silicon Valley, to have people that are starting companies that that look like me and look like you. I mean, the Black and Latino founders are really underrepresented, especially when it comes to venture-backed startups. And so, yeah, for me, I think finding people who are interested in similar things to what I'm interested in, again, that's just kind of become a theme for me. So, we'll get into my business in a bit, but like that interest in manufacturing has really followed me throughout my lifetime, from Pittsburgh to some of my earlier career things, and now into Silicon Valley, where I've worked in several manufacturing companies that are making products. And in that process, a lot of these coworkers and people that I've worked with, they've become that friend group for me, where I see that they're working on something cool, or they're building a new business. And so I've got several friends that have now stepped out on their own, and they've been the role models for me, starting companies in the battery space, in autonomous vehicles and flight vehicles. And I just think that stuff is insanely cool. And so as I see them starting it, and when those are people that are close enough to you that you can ask questions, the dumb questions that you have always wondered about but never really had a person to ask. I really think that that's one of the things that communities like ours are missing, is that we don't have people in our families and in our close friends groups, typically, that are doing those types of things. But as I've been developing those friendships, I've been able to ask the questions like, hey, um, how should I think about starting this business? Where should I start with this? Do you know any good lawyers? I didn't even know that I needed a good lawyer to start some of these things. How do I go about raising venture capital money? Is this business even right for it? All of those things are I think the conversation topics that I would like to see more of us engaging in, because it is really important. And I think that those experiences and those friendships are the relationships that have given me that confidence to want to do something different and off the beaten path. And again, like, made me feel like I'm not that alone in that journey. Because I think that, on a human level, all of us need community. So when you have a community of people that know and understand what you're doing, and you feel like you're not alone in that journey, it just makes it a little bit easier when you've got someone to turn to, to ask questions and to relate to.
Really cool that you're able to experience that, especially like for the first time in your whole family, right? You're the one taking a big leap and a big risk when jumping into a world where no one in your family has done. There's a lot of like fear of like failure and like fear of like what people would think. How do you navigate that mindset where you're like, oh man, I'm scared? And like you said, you have the right friends now, you know who to lean to. But do you ever like have that fear, like, oh my god, like, what am I doing?
Every day, I feel like I have that fear right now. Um, I think it can important to kind of unpack some of the things that are wrapped around that fear. And I'll speak about this, like, just within the Black community. Um, Growing up where I did, and with the economic means that my family did, there was always this importance on education, because education could get you a good job, and with that good job, you could have stability to provide for your family,
Right.
all of those things, right? And so I think that, like, those things have been instilled in, like, African American, Latino community for a long time. Just get your education, get a good job, and de-risk as much as possible. And so I actually think that one of the things that kind of hampers the interest in starting entrepreneurial ventures in the Black community is this idea that that is a very risky path to take, and that there are much lower risk ways to make money.
Right.
And
Right.
I agree with that. Actually, it's worth stating that I actually think that there are certainly lower risk ways to make money. Um, and I certainly will not knock anyone for pursuing that as a career path, because I pursued that career path for the first 15, 18 years of my life. But I will say that after a certain point, once you have the stability of life and and the uh, assurance that like, okay, if I go for a few months without a paycheck, I think we can survive. I know that we can still do this. Then you've met Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't, have you ever heard of
No,
this?
no. Tell me.
So there's this philosophy about this a pyramid of needs, and at the base of that pyramid, there's like shelter and food. And if you have those basic things, then you can move up into other things like, um, that are more just like nicer to have things. So, all right, now I want to live in a nice neighborhood and maybe have a car and things that make like life a little bit easier. And then at the top of the pyramid, there are all the things that we would classify as like first world problems. Things like, do I have Wi-Fi? Do I have like a smartphone? So I would say that similarly, I see that in my career and in lots of people's careers. Like starting at the base, you just want to know that like that you have enough money to provide for your family and your loved ones. As you start to move up, then it's like, well, am I happy in my job? And and I think that, to a certain extent, you can maybe find happiness even in things that you don't want to do. And I remember seeing my parents, do this. Like, I think that they did a lot of things that they had to do, but they also still were wanting, always wanted to be in roles or jobs where they at least like the work. All right, it's tolerable. And then at the top of that pyramid, uh, I think that there's like passion. Like, am I really passionate about this? Can I make an impact doing this? And that's really where I'm finding myself now trying to make that leap into that next rank of that hierarchy of needs. Um, so yeah, that was maybe a longer answer than you
No, no, it was
expected, but like,
awesome. I like it.
part of that career path of, going from like, just how do I de-risk my life as much as possible? How do I create some stability for myself to the point where, you want to start something, a business maybe that you're passionate about. That's the way that I've at least thought about this in my career and how I've gotten there.
That's a really cool way of looking at it. Kind of talking about that pyramid. I kind of was imagining, like, when you said the food and shelter, it's almost like the bottom is the foundation, right? Like once you have the foundation, then you can kind of start leveling up. I know that you have Digon, which is your baby, 2 years
Yeah,
or a year.
a little over a year,
Yeah,
13 months.
wow, 13
Not that I'm
months.
counting.
Not that you're counting, right? Yeah, 13 months because you said you were working for 15 years, and you were working at Google, right, and Tesla.
Yeah.
Weren't you like telling me they used to work like traveling like FBI or something?
Yeah, so we could start there actually.
I
That,
thought
I
you were
think
a secret agent when I
that's a
met
good
you.
place to start. So I'll tell you about the career trajectory, and then I promise you we'll get to the start of the
Yeah,
business. But like,
let's go there.
yeah, so when I started off early career, my first job right out of college was working for this consulting firm. Actually, the name of the firm is PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC is what they're known as today. And they're really known as a big four accounting firm. So there are like four firms in the world that people really know and go to when they need accounting services. There's Ernst and Young, there's KPMG, there's Deloitte, and PwC. And so PwC had taken on this federal government consultancy work where they were working with different government agencies and just really providing them with smart people to help them execute on accounting work and operations work and things like that. And so that's really where I started off my career. This was back in, I think, 2005 was when I had my first internship with them, and it was just incredibly cool. My first 2 years at the company, I got staffed on this project with NASA.
Whoa,
And I was like, well, this is really
aliens.
cool. Aliens, yeah, Area 51. No, it was actually maybe more cool or less cool than that, but like, NASA headquarters down in Washington D.C., doing a lot of finance work and helping them like map out different processes. And at the time I wasn't really thinking much of it. It was really just, it could have been any organization figuring out, how do they pay their bills? What's the process for that? How do they do their accounting work? What's the process for that? But the cool thing about this job was that I got to understand the inner workings of that agency, how it worked. I got to visit all of the space centers. So my first time coming to California was back in 2006. I was a few miles away from here at Ames Research Center, documenting some processes there. Got to visit the Space Flight Center down in Lancaster, California. And so that was one of these jobs that really took me to some really interesting places. In my third year, I guess at PwC, I had a partner that was telling me about this new project that he was putting together. And it was an international project that was focused on manufacturing. And I was like, well, I love traveling, I love like international travel, and I love manufacturing. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, sign me
Yeah.
up.
Sign me in.
And he was just like, well, one thing you should know about this project before we get started is that it's going to be in Baghdad,
Yeah.
Iraq. And this was in 2008, like when there was it was still pretty gnarly time to be there. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, it seems like a really interesting project. I have never served in the military, but I really like this idea that I could use my mind and my skills
Right.
to help to help people in setting up new manufacturing operations. And I was like, well, it sounds interesting. I'm just going to do it. So yeah, I'll tell you because a lot of times people ask me this. They're like, "Were you married at the time?" And I'll
Yeah. I was
say,
about to say.
I was not married at the time, but I was dating the woman who is now my wife. And so this was the first of many of these like, I can't believe you're doing this moments. So, by the time I get to the end of this, you'll be like, how is she still with you? So shout out to her, shout out to Ashley. Yeah, so I went to live in Iraq. I was a team of I was one member of a team of three people. So when we were first deployed there, we were literally living in trailers,
Oh,
like outside of this military base.
this was in Iraq
This was in
still?
Iraq.
Wow.
Yep,
Must
in
have been hot,
Baghdad.
huh?
It was hot. Let's
Sheesh.
see, when did I get there? I think I got there in like April of that year, and it was already like blazing summer temperatures. So it like the thing that was most striking for me was that I didn't have a preconception about where we were going to be staying, but the things that no one prepares you for when you go to a place like Iraq is that um, it is a big city, like especially Baghdad. So Baghdad is the second biggest city in like the Arab Middle East, only after Cairo. So Cairo is the largest by far. 'Cause it's a massive city, but Baghdad is about 6 million people. So it's a
6
little,
million. Yeah.
yeah, 6 million.
That's
So it's like bigger than LA,
yeah.
bigger than Houston, bigger than all these big cities that we think of, almost as big as New York City. And we're in this villa in the middle of the city, and it's in this walled off part of the town that they call the international zone or the green zone. If you like read any of the books that were written about the time there. And so our job was essentially to work with these 15 factories that were all over the country,
Gotcha.
in these remote locations. And the mandate for these factories were that they were in the most volatile areas of the country. So
Jeez.
I was like, oh, okay, so you're sending us to the worst parts of the
Were
country.
you scared during this time? Like, dang, they might blow us up.
Yeah, I was pretty scared. We actually did have to go through military deployment training, where you go
Dang.
to Alabama, you go through these obstacle courses, you go through first aid, first aid and response on like how to make a tourniquet out of someone's shirt and stop bleeding, and how to navigate like an area that might have tripwires for like an explosive device. So
It's good to know that here in Silicon Valley.
yeah, that's you don't get that much of that out here,
Yeah.
but looking back, I'm like, damn, I still can't believe that I did this. But yeah, so when we got there, I think that was the first thing, was like, man, it's crazy, it's hot. This is a much bigger city than I expected it to be. And the work is just like, it's intense. So I knew that it was going to be intense. The other thing though that I have to say, and every time I talk about Iraq, I always say this because people, I think, have perceptions about places and people that a lot of times aren't rooted in reality. But the Iraqis were some of the warmest people that I've ever met. So I still have like really close friends that I still keep in touch with on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, that would literally give you the shirt off of their back. And I think that's the piece that has stuck with me
The
the
most.
most over the years.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so getting back to this project, we were essentially working with these factories that were in places like Fallujah. So we had this cement factory that they were making cement to support the construction industry because there were a lot of buildings that needed to be built and repaired. And so that was one instance of like, okay, we're helping this company get this machinery, this infrastructure they need to make a material that they're going to use further downstream in another industry.
Yeah.
We were helping another factory source tire presses for
Wow.
making tires, and they needed those tires to put them onto trucks because the trucks were transporting goods from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey. It was like the primary means to get things in and out of the country. And then another factory, maybe another example was we were sourcing these sewing machines for a company that made uniforms for first responders like police officers and firefighters. And so I really just got turned on to this idea that, like, wow, there's a very real um, impact that you can make in a targeted strategic investment like this that can enable a company to make something that can be consumed by lots of other companies. And then there's the human aspect of it. So I talked about the cement factory that we worked with. Really interesting story here, and you might have to edit some of these because I got so many stories. But
It's all good, man. Keep it all.
so this in this factory, the director general, they're like the CEOs of these companies. They were state owned. He was telling us about how this factory was the tallest structure in the city of Fallujah, and it was also nearby the highway. And so during the times of like the heaviest fighting, there would be insurgents that would be like up on the highest parts of this factory shooting down at like, the military that was passing by on the highway. And I remember thinking like, damn. And I asked him, I was like, so like what happened to those people? Like, are they all dead? Like what
Yeah.
happened? And he was like, no, like they work here. I was like,
Honestly,
are you kidding me? Like you brought me here and like these fools still work at this company? And he
that's
was like,
crazy.
yeah, that like this is the reason why you guys are doing what you're doing is because um in that economically unstable situation, you have people that would, really just want to provide for their families. They want, to have food on the table. They're at the base of that pyramid of the hierarchy of needs. And if we are able to provide them with stable income, respectable job where they can feel good about what they're doing, then they would much rather be doing this than working for some insurgent group. And like all the judgments that I had about the people started to come back to me. And I was like, well, that's not all that different from what I saw when I was growing up in Pittsburgh and what you see in places like Detroit in the Midwest. When the industry leaves the area, people are really just kind of forced to take a step down that hierarchy and do whatever they need to do to survive. So that really stuck with me, like on a personal and emotional level. I really fell in love with manufacturing and knew that that was something that I wanted to pursue as a career passion.
That's where it clicked for you,
That's where it
right
clicked
there.
for me. Yeah,
Wow, that's
it
awesome.
was like yeah, I had the family background in it, but actually seeing how that work manifested and could really improve the quality of life for the people that worked there and also make a positive impact on the economy. I was like, well, what else is out there?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's really crazy that the connection between manufacturing, where you grew up in Pittsburgh, and what you ended up doing in Iraq, like all kind of just connected
All in that moment. Yeah.
generations.
This is one of those things too that I think is really hard for people, myself included, to draw the picture. Looking forward, like who knows what I'm going to do next in my career, what you're going to do next. But looking back, I think it's always easier to kind of see the through line from where you started to what you did and to how you got here today. And so I find that anytime I feel lost in my career, or I think like, well, I have no idea what I want to do next, I go back to some of those things and I start to look at that story to make sure, like, okay, does this make sense to me? Um, is it in line with where I came from and where I want to go? And that really, I think, is just it's been a good way for me to think about my career trajectory.
And then after the Iraq experience that you had, you came back to the US?
Yeah, so I typically kind of glaze over this part in my background because sometimes it comes off as pretentious, and it's okay if it does. But I was applying to business school before I went off to Iraq.
Okay.
Applied to a few schools, had gotten rejected. I was actually part of the reason why I decided to take on this project because I was like, well, my plan to go to business school just kind of got scrapped. So I'm going to go and do something, interesting and adventurous for a year and see where I am the following year. So the partner on this project was telling me about like business school. He was like, "Hey, Will, have you ever thought about going to business school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I applied to business school last year. I didn't get in." He was like, "Have you ever thought about applying to Harvard?" I was like, "I just told you I didn't get into any of those schools. I'm sure I'll push my luck." But he was like, "Look, if you decide that you want to apply, I'll endorse you. I'll write you a letter of recommendation." And and that's time during when I was in Iraq. I got a call back from the school that said like, "Hey, Will, we would like to invite you for interviews. We know you're working overseas, so you can't make it to Boston, but we have interviewers in a few cities around the world. Would you be interested in going to Dubai and interviewing there?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, sign me
I'll
up
be
for
there right
a trip
now.
to
I'm on
Dubai,
my
right?"
way.
So I get to Dubai,
Yeah.
went to this office building, a neighborhood like called Sharjah, and walk into this room, meet the interviewer, and I actually recognized the interviewer from like a program that I did the year before, and to tell her about my story from the last time the two of us had met when I was in this program, to what I was doing at that time. I was thinking it to myself. I was like, I think I got this in the bag, right?
As soon as you saw it, huh?
Yeah.
You're like, I got it. It's over.
So I get back to my trailer in Iraq, and I remember a few months later getting the acceptance email
How
that
exciting
I got
was
into
that?
HBS. I mean, people that come from where I come from, that's just like a dream for them. So like for me, I felt like I was almost living somebody else's life, and I've had a few of those out of body
For
experience.
real, right?
Yeah, really, it was very surreal. And yeah, and so I got into business school, and so after this project in Iraq, I came back. I worked the summer in Washington D.C. Went off to business school for two
Wow.
years. Yeah,
That's crazy. Like
crazy.
the whole your whole story is like it's like almost like everything just connects. Like, dot 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 dot.
Yeah.
It's like a connection. It's
Well,
like a web.
it is, man. It is, and I'll tell you that it's not all like up and to the
Oh,
right. Like
definitely.
there's definitely a lot of times when I think I've fallen off the track, and really it's just all part of the plan. But yeah, to maybe put the exclamation point on that, HBS, Harvard Business School, was the only school that I got into.
Dang. That's all
Ain't
you
that
needed.
crazy?
Yeah. It was meant for
Yeah,
I think it was meant to be then.
meant to be. That's
Yeah.
right.
And in terms of when you said, you had some ups, but then you also had some downs. In those terms, when you have those downs, is your faith what keeps you grounded? Because I know you said you believed in God, so I just want to
Yeah.
like, is that like your prime go-to when you have those difficulties?
It is, yeah. It's like one of those things that I go back to again and again. And I remember like being pretty deep in my faith when I was going through one of these things. I'll tell you this story after business school of like what actually brought me to Silicon Valley, because I don't talk about that much either. But yeah, there's this verse in the Bible, and I think it's King David that was talking about this, but he was saying that when I look back over my life and all the things that God has done for me, I can't help but be glad. And that's one of when I was talking earlier about just looking back at that through line and knowing where I came from, what I had to overcome to even get to where I am today. You know, like dealing with an investor telling you no, like, oh my God, like that's nothing. So those are the times when I try to remind myself, hey, look, I've already been through so much, like, that's really what I go.
I think that's a beautiful verse. One of the things that you said is like an investor telling you no. I think in a way, when you got the no's from all these, business schools that you applied to, they all said no. Then you ended up getting one of the best ones that you can
That's
possibly
right.
get.
So every no is just a delayed yes. And and anything that's actually worth fighting for, and that's going to be really worth that payoff, you're going to go through a lot of no's. Like for me, I saw that same trend in business school, and then, applying for jobs that I wanted here in Silicon Valley. and where I was able to work, I think was certainly worth that. Going through that time of uncertainty, and then building this business, you're going to hear a million no's from investors. You're going to hear a million no's from customers, but all it takes is just a few for to get things started. And the crazy thing, that is also a kind of a recurring theme, is once you get that first yes, then people will try to fake the funk like they saw it in you the entire time.
Oh yeah.
So, you get into a school like HBS, and then other business schools are like, oh man, like, yeah, we missed out on this great candidate. I'm like, actually, I applied last year. You guys rejected me.
Yeah.
And it's the same, as,
Did
as
that
you go
kind
along.
of feel good though in a way?
I mean, of course it feels good. And I try to be like,
Humble.
humble about
Yeah.
it, but it's I do always try to keep that in perspective. Like a lot of these same people that are telling me no right now, when they see what I'm capable of, they're gonna change their tune real quick. And so I also try to not burn those bridges during when I'm getting those no's, because you never know for later further down the road. Um, as long as you're not petty, you may be able to recruit them in as allies in whatever it is you're doing later. So, yeah,
Great response to the naysayers, right?
definitely,
Now you're
definitely.
back here in Silicon Valley. You went to business school.
Yeah,
You got a Harvard, which is crazy.
crazy.
Um, you got now you're here in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah,
Is
so I
that how
got
you got here?
that is, yeah. So I got recruited by Google out of business school to come out to the Bay Area, and to work there in their finance operations role.
How do you like
And it was,
Google?
you know, I didn't love it, which is
Hey,
crazy to
that's
say,
okay though.
because, and that's okay. I'll tell you that I mean, the things I loved about it are the things that most people love about Google. Like, we had free food. They had, they moved me out here and, paid for the move. There's the Google bus, there's bowling, there's, massages and stuff. And so I'm like, all these trappings of a really awesome company, are great. And in that hierarchy of needs, I feel like Google does a great job at the very top of that pyramid.
Mm,
But what I was missing was that middle layer in that base. I didn't feel like I didn't like the job that I was doing. I didn't really enjoy the people that I was working with. And so after maybe 9 months of doing that, I started to really like question, like, hey, was this the right choice? Is this the right company for me? Yeah, it's solving a lot of things at the top, but it's really not getting the things that are really important to me at the base of that pyramid. So, interview like this, to not just, flex the entire time and to have people believe that, you've gotten there without any adversity. But when I was at Google, that was the first time I was ever put on a performance plan.
really?
Yeah. So
Wow.
imagine this, like 6 months out of like a really prestigious school like Harvard, coming into this job that I really felt like wasn't all that difficult. But being put on a performance plan, and saying like, hey, you're really not meeting the mark. I don't really know if this job is going to be for you. That was a really hard thing for me to live with and to swallow. Um, and so I ended up actually leaving that job without having the next thing lined up. And kind of looking, again, like looking back over my
Yeah.
career, like, well, what is it that I really want to do? And I think one of the things I realized is that I really like, working on things where I can see the result of my work. And in that type of in that role that I was in, that just wasn't one of the things that you could see in a role like that. And so I started looking for manufacturing opportunities. I was like, well, I really enjoyed this job that I did in manufacturing. I feel like, that's where my calling is. So let me look for opportunities there. I didn't really even know what all the companies were, out there at the time. Really, Apple was the biggest show in town. Yeah, so Apple, yeah, everybody knows Apple, but like most people don't, have an appreciation for the fact though that Apple outsources most of their manufacturing. So, companies like Foxconn, Jabil, Flextronics, they are really the companies that do the manufacturing for Apple, and Apple's more of a design house. So they're very design centric. Once they have a beautiful product that's ready to manufacture, they make millions of them with contract manufacturers. But, again, like being this person that wants to see the result of the product, I was looking for something a little different. And so around then, a friend of mine was telling me about this startup, Tesla. where he was working, and he was like, "Have you ever heard of Tesla?" And I was like, "Nah, man, never heard of it." So
What year was this?
this was 2012, or it might have been 2012 when I heard of the
Yeah,
company.
I heard of Tesla like 2018, like 2017.
Yeah,
2012, I never heard of it. Yeah.
2012 was like it was long ways back. So Tesla had just come out with the Model S, and that was like their first fully designed and built up
Right.
vehicle that was fully electric. And this friend of mine, he was a business school friend, was like, "Hey, I have one of these cars. It's I'm working on the sales team. Do you mind if I bring it out to this was like my wife's birthday
Right.
party that
Wow.
summer?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, man, bring this car, like bring the car out." So,
Back to the
he's
future, huh? Felt like
Back to
that.
the Future. So I'll never forget. We lived in Santa Clara at the time. We were like off of Montague Expressway. He shows up with this car, and the entire party stopped. Like,
Really?
yeah, everybody was just like, "What the heck is that? Can we take a ride in the car?" So we all left the party. We were hanging out like on the sidewalk, and he was taking us on joy rides up and down the expressway. And I was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen." Like, it's an electric car. It's clean. It's eco-friendly, but it doesn't look like
A
a geek
Prius,
mobile.
like an
Yeah,
early
like a
Prius.
Prius that
Yeah.
we had at the time. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, and it's also it's good for the environment. Like, tell me about more about this company. Like, I have to work there. And so he was telling me like, look, Will, we actually just bought this old factory from Toyota, and it's in Fremont, like at the base of the mountains on the other side of Silicon Valley. Um, and he was like, we're ripping out all the old equipment, and we need to buy new equipment to put in there. I know you did this kind of work in Iraq. Like, surely you could do this here at Tesla. And so I was like, well, little does he know, I don't really know all that much about it, but I'm willing to interview. So I met the VP, both VPs at that time of supply chain, and they brought me in as the first equipment buyer that the company had ever hired. And this role really started as like a special project team. They were like, we need to buy robots for or negotiate robots prices for that we use to assemble this vehicle. And I can send you a video of this manufacturing line after, but it's really cool. These robotic arms that do all the welding, the dispensing, and everything on the vehicle. They assemble it together, and I was like, well, what do I do after that? And they were like, oh, don't worry, we'll find another project for you. Well, I negotiated those robotics prices, and then I went looking for the next problem, and I found this guy that was making building stamping presses in the back of the factory. These stamping presses are like the size of a 2 or 3 story building. You have 3 or 4 of them in a row, and they press down on these flat metal sheets and turn them into a car body side or a door or a hood or a trunk. So every surface that you touch with your hands, if it's on a Tesla, has come through one of those stamping presses. And that was the next project that I took on. And then that evolved into a paint shop and a general assembly shop and a bunch of other things. And I think that there was this pattern of like, I just enjoyed that work so much. I loved seeing how things were built and actually seeing the result of it. That I just went looking for, more and more work. So eventually, I built out a team of like 30 people, and together at Tesla, yep, and together we were managing about $700 million per year in equipment. And so it was a really high profile role too. There were lots big responsibility, and like that line item shows up as like a big red line item in property, plant, and equipment. So at board meetings and analyst calls and other kind of public facing things, people always want to know, like, is Tesla on track with its manufacturing efforts? Is it going to be able to launch Model X in time? Is it going to be able to launch Model 3 on time? And a lot of that responsibility came down to me, my team, and our supplier partners that were building these things for us. And so this was just like couldn't have been more opposite from the role that I had at Google, and
Night and day.
night and day.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, you would think, well, one environment is just a lot less hostile, because Tesla was a pretty rough place to work, and that was really what kind of instilled in me that this idea that everybody has their ideal conditions to thrive.
Right.
And I'll give this analogy that Google is maybe like a tropical rainforest where you've got exotic fruits and beautiful flowers and all of these things. And yeah, there are like lots of people who have thrived there and built great careers there. And Google's a really a big company, so it does lots of things. But like Tesla at the time was really like a desert. It was really resource constrained. Every quarter we were really running it thin, like on in terms of like how much cash we had and how we were able to do things. But there are certain animals and plants that only will thrive in the desert.
Certain elements, yeah,
Certain elements,
which is really
exactly.
awesome.
And so, like when I describe myself to people,
You're a
I've now
cactus.
I'm a cactus. I'm a
Yeah,
desert plant. So like if
yeah,
you try to give me too much water, too much resources, you know, try to like over cater, I'm like, no, that's not what I need. What I need is for you to just like give me my resources and get out the way and just let me build. And I was able to really do some really awesome things
and
when I
Tesla allowed that.
and Tesla allowed that.
Wow.
I would say like it's. I wanted to believe it's just because they believed in me. I think it was really because there just weren't enough people to do the work, and my boss was just like, "Listen, I got way more stuff to worry about than this. You just go worry about this, and like if you need me, holler." And whenever I hollered, like people really knew that I needed something, but that was really it took me having to experiment with that in different work environments to figure out like where do I thrive and where do I do my best work, and that was one of those environments for me. Um, I'll also mention this because I think it's worth mentioning if we're if we're going to get to talking about Diagon, but in this time at Tesla, I was I realized that there was a problem like whenever I needed to source equipment, I talked about these metal stamping presses that are the size of an apartment building, and we had these really all these requirements and specifications for it. Like I'm looking for a press that can press on aluminum sheet metal. It has to be accommodate the size of a Model X body side, and it has to be a mechanical press with certain features and capabilities. Where do you find something like that? Like, how do you even start that kind of a search? And I think people just assume that people that get put into these roles just know intuitively where to find these things, but it's really not more sophisticated than most of the time doing Google searches or talking to a colleague or a friend that at that company that did this at their last company. And then there are these trade shows that we would go to where we would find these other companies that made them. But I recognize that as a problem. I'm like, well, where do I go to find qualified suppliers that can make these things? How much should I expect to pay for this? And then even once I ordered the thing, um, it took like 18 to 24 months to get it from Italy, where they made it, to California, where we were going to use it. And so there are all these other steps that you have to do in managing that as a project. And I was feeling like, well, I came in to do this job that I thought was just purchasing and negotiating pricing, but really the meat of this job is managing these projects and managing these really big vendors that are doing these really high stakes projects. And when I really think about the genesis of my company now, that's essentially what we do is we help companies procure manufacturing equipment, helping them find qualified vendors that make the equipment that they need, and then helping them execute those projects because they tend to be much higher complexity than other things that you do in a manufacturing environment. So in a lot of ways, I'd say Tesla was one of those most formative experiences for me that's set me on this path to entrepreneurship and starting my company.
So almost like Tesla's the seed that allowed you to really implement like, okay, I'm ready to start growing and do my own thing now and branch out. Was that your last job right before you started Diagon?
No, I'll breeze through a few of them, maybe a pause on one or two, but like I knew it wasn't the last job that I had before starting Diagon. So when I left Tesla, I knew that I wanted to work on earlier stage companies. I
Gotcha.
won't say that I was ready to start the company myself, but I was like, I'm ready to work in a startup. So
And during this time, sorry to interrupt,
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
was this the reason you wanted to go to a startup was to get the idea of like what it would take if you wanted to create your own company, or at this time you didn't even know you wanted to create a company?
At that time, I didn't know that I wanted to start a company yet.
Okay.
I knew that the part of the job that I really enjoyed was that high learning, high growth kind of trajectory. So there was always something new to learn, something new to do. And there comes a time when like these types of things become more like rinse and repeat. Like, all right, you're doing the same thing just in a different location. And at around this time, I also had like my first, or both of my kids, and I was like, all right, I think I need something that's a little less intense than Tesla, but that also will afford me some learning opportunities to learn about a new industry and to work on something that's earlier stage, because yeah, maybe one other thing that's worth mentioning for Tesla, and the reason why I think a lot of people decide to start companies is that was the first time I recognized the power of equity. So when I started at Tesla, the company was about um, you know 2,000 people, and the stock price was, I think I got in at like 172. And when I left Tesla, there were 80,000 people, and the stock price was around 385. So it had doubled in value, more than doubled. Um, and uh, I made a good amount of money from my equity, which was great. But people that were there a year or two before, like even 1 year before, had a base stock price of $17 and $10. And so when you compound that from $10, writing that all the way up to 380 or $400, that's a much higher return on their equity. And so, I was seeing that people were literally retiring at the age of like of 40, like, hey, I made all I need to make. I'm gonna go retire for a few years, travel the world. And I was like, damn, like did I get here too late? Or like what, how can I benefit from a company that's going to go through that type of a growth trajectory? And I think that you really th- most of those stories happen when companies are small and grow to be big. It's really hard to get like a 5x or a 100x on a company that's already big,
It's like finding a
company
needle in a haystack, right?
like finding
Yeah.
a needle in a haystack. It's also like, um, finding some, it just expecting a company like Google or Amazon to quadruple or even like 10x in value from where it is today is like nearly impossible. That would need to be like a $10 trillion company. But if you are in at a really early stage company, where maybe the equity is worth a few cents or a few dollars, then that's a much more believable story because there's the growth trajectory ahead of them is still much longer. And that was really another one of those factors that was like, well, let me just try my hand at this at a few startups. I know the skills that I have in manufacturing and supply chain, and so I went to a robotics company. I did that for about a year. I worked in the construction industry for 2 years, building like factory based apartment buildings. That was really cool. We built an apartment building in Oakland. It's like people live there now, which is really
Wow.
crazy and cool.
You drive by and be like, oh,
I drive by like
yeah,
all the time. I'm like, hey, that's P1, project one that we worked on.
yeah.
And really that was an experience for me too, where we had a phenomenal product, phenomenal team, but just really poor timing with that, like really the company really taking off right before the pandemic. So one of the saddest experiences that I've had was when we had to wind that company down, because we just were not able to raise enough money to keep the thing going. And in that experience, I remember talking to my family about it and talking to my friends and them being like really fearful of like my job prospects. Hey, are you going to be able to find another job? Are you going to be okay? And I remember like looking around the room, and nobody was really panicking. Like the engineers, the CEO, everybody was just like, look, this really sucks. It's a like terrible thing to have to wind down the company, but everybody's going to be okay. And literally within a month, everybody was reemployed somewhere else. And that was for the like one of the first time I realized the that Silicon Valley people are just built differently. Like there's an expectation that you're going to try a bunch of things. Most of them are going to fail. So having that failure on your resume is not a badge of shame. It's more like a badge of honor. And that people are really fearless. Like they think about the company that they're working at as more like a project. Like, hey, I'm going to work on this for a few years. I hope it takes off. If it does, that's great. We all win. And if not, like, it's okay. I'll find something. I'll find something else. Yeah, on to the next. So that was, at that time, at that point in time, I got recruited to a rocket manufacturer, and they were like, "Hey, we're making these rockets. We're launching them into space, and we need a supply chain manager that's going to help us build them and launch them." And I was like, this has to be like, I must be living someone else's life, like one of those scenes again. It brought me back to those NASA days when I was like, working with alongside NASA as a contractor. And I was like, well, I've always been a space geek. I would love to have my hand in helping to build these types of things. And so I actually got to do that for 2 years and build a team there. We sourced all the materials to make the rocket, all the equipment that we used to build it, and even like ship the rocket from where we built them in Alameda, California, out to Alaska and Florida, where we would launch them. So it was just a really cool, I would say, great last corporate experience for me, enough for me to say like, all right, I think I've gotten what I need out of the stable career track. I'm ready to jump out of this track and more onto that entrepreneurial path. And that's really when that idea for Diagon started to form. And yeah, I felt like at that point I've gotten enough out of that pyramid where I had enough stability, and direction, and actually also, quite frankly, the skill set to be able to build something that didn't require a lot of assets. And that's really like how I got started on this path.
Wow. I mean, that's it's so much that just like, kind of correlated to Digon. When you finally finished the rocket company, when you left Astra, what was that conversation like with your wife? Because I'm sure you already had your kids here at the time too.
Yeah, yeah. So two kids, in school, we had a lot of expenses that were in line with like, what you'd expect a stable kind of VP to do. And starting a business, it really does require a lot of resources before you're able to get anyone else to believe in it. You have to believe in it, you have to invest in it. And so I remember that conversation being like, um, it was funny. I think I told my wife, she knew that I was ready to leave my job because when I would come home and I'd ask her like, hey, guess what happened at work today? She's like, did you quit? I'm like, no, I didn't quit yet, but
Yeah.
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 So when the day finally came and I was like, yeah, I think this is actually my last week and I'm ready to start a company. Um, she just kind of looked at me and like the slowest tears started rolling down her face, and I was just like,
Denzel
are
Washington
these
style.
happy tears? Yeah, Denzel Washington style,
Yeah.
like thug tears.
Yeah.
So I was like, are these happy tears, sad tears? She was like, I don't even know what emotion I'm feeling right now, but I know that like once you decide that you're going to do something, there's nothing that I can do that's going to stop you from doing it. And so if you're going to do it, just like do your best at it, and we'll make it work. So I tell you, she's the real one. Like, she's been through so much with
I
me.
mean, that's awesome to have
It's
someone like that in your corner throughout most of your entire like experience, from when you were in Iraq all the way leading to starting the company. That's like one in a million, I feel like. Yeah.
legit. Yeah, legitimately. So yeah, so I remember that conversation, and she reminds me of it all the time.
During dinner.
So yeah, during dinner, like, hey, remember this was your choice. I'm like, yeah, I know. Yeah, but that was really the start of the journey for me. And yeah, so I started this company in January of last year.
Congrats. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, so started the company in January last year, and really just I didn't have all of the pieces there at that time, as I think most founders don't. I knew that the vision was that I wanted to make it easier for companies to get the manufacturing equipment that they needed. Like that's really at the core of it. I started to think about like how much of our national conversation happens around nearshoring and reshoring manufacturing during COVID. Everyone started to realize what a supply chain was, because they were like, I didn't care about the supply chain until it was disrupted, and now I can't get, a headlight for my car, or, a lightning cable for my
Everything
iPhone.
kind of stopped. And it
Everything
was
stopped.
annoying, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like, my mom, I think she thought I was an accountant for the first 10 years of my career, and she was like, "Wait, you supply chain? I was reading about this on the newspaper." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what I do, mom." So, yeah, so that was really the first time that um, I started to think about how I wanted to piece the business together, and this idea that, like, everyone wants to have more manufacturing in the U.S. and near the U.S., but most people don't know what that actually takes to get it done. Like, if you don't have the tools to make an autonomous vehicle, or battery materials, or whatever, you're never going to make them. You're going to have to rely on someone else to make them until you have the tools and infrastructure to do it. And so Diagon's mission is really to get those assets into the hands of the companies that need them.
So you could focus on like creating while you guys take care of all the back stuff that, yeah. And that's
Absolutely.
awesome. And I think there's not a lot of companies from, I don't know much about it, but from what I hear, I've like never heard of a manufacturing company like, that does something like you,
Yeah.
which is awesome.
I think that what we're doing is really unique. Like, there are lots of people, to give. There are a lot of other founders actually that are building things in this arena, to give them credit. But I think that there's room for everybody. Like, people, there are. When I was at Tesla, and even since then, I saw that there were people that were making it easier to get the raw materials that you need to make products, making it easier to get, a fully finished product from a contract manufacturer, making it easier to do construction projects, and to source software. And so there were all of these things that were happening, and I was like, well, when is someone going to do this for manufacturing equipment? And so I was kind of waiting for someone to build the system that I could use that made my life easier for sourcing equipment. And one day I had a mentor tell me, like, no one is going to build this. Like, if you want to see this, you got to do it
And,
yourself. So you
and
build
that's
it.
awesome.
Yeah. So that's the reason, that's really the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And I think, there are, lots of different founder profiles out there. I'll say that, like, I felt like I was kind of an outsider, because I think I told you at the beginning of this interview, I'm going to be 40 this year.
Right. Which is
So I'm like,
insane. I literally was telling him right before he got here, I thought he was 30. I swear, like I'm not even kidding.
we'll go with that. We'll go with 30. I'm going to go with your answer.
Yeah,
So,
but he is vegan. That was the secret.
not quite vegan, but, like, I try to stay active. Yeah. So, yeah, yeah. So, I was thinking, like, all right, I need to find a way to, I need to find a way to do this in a way that's repeatable for the companies that need it. And so we really just started by doing the thing that we would do, like, if we had nothing, which we didn't, especially last year, is just, like, offering up our skills, as a service to companies that need to source manufacturing equipment. So the role within most of these companies is called CapEx procurement. So CapEx means capital expenditures, and capital expenditures are, like, the big ticket items that companies spend money on. Most of the time, that includes manufacturing equipment, automation equipment like robotics and things like that, and test equipment like, measuring tools, microscopes, all that kind of the lab equipment and things like that. And so, we just really started by working with companies that needed help with sourcing those things. We would charge, like, a monthly fee, and or per project fee, and those companies would, provide us with their specifications. So tell us, like, hey, here's the piece of equipment that I need. Here's what it needs to be able to do, and I need to be able to do it reliably, or, within this confidence interval. Can you guys go out and find us suppliers that
Wow,
make this
so simple for
equipment?
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so simple for them. So we simplify that. They offload it to us, because a lot of times what I realize is that companies have, um, that don't have a dedicated team to do this, like I did at Tesla. They are doing this as their second job, and it's more than any one person should manage, even as their first job. I can tell you that from firsthand experience. And so now, that we're doing this, it's enabled us to now build out this network of suppliers that make things like,
Right.
mixing tanks and robots and cutting machines, 3D printers. Yeah, I think it's
Is
phenomenal.
a lot of the stuff that, you guys get coming from overseas, or are you guys manufacturers in Mexico? We had talked briefly about that.
Yeah, great question. So we started with this idea, or at least I'll say I started with this idea that we needed more of that manufacturing equipment and those assets to be deployed in the US. So we started with just the US market, mostly companies that were headquartered in the US and building in the US.
That's awesome too.
And yeah, for not, I think it's the best place to start is with the market that you know the best. Um, the equipment, though, comes from all over the world. So the equipment market is really a global market. And, sadly, I think I'll say sadly for me, we don't make a lot of the manufacturing equipment in the US anyway. So there's not much that we can source from here in terms of the infrastructure. And so what we started with was a US base of customers with, suppliers and manufacturing equipment coming from Germany, China, South Korea, Japan, all the places you might expect. But then we started to, expand from that U.S. footprint when we realized that there were a lot of U.S. based companies that were starting manufacturing facilities in Mexico because Mexico has a much more favorable labor market than the U.S. does. So actually, Mexico has been a big beneficiary of this U.S. trend of having manufacturing either closer to home and with allies like Mexico and Canada.
And things come quicker.
Things come quicker. Yeah. So you can build it there. The logistics channels are already in place. You can ship really easily. Customs and duties are much easier shipping something from Mexico within North America free trade NAFTA. So all of those things are really benefiting Mexico right now. So we're seeing a booming market there, but we're also seeing it north of the border in Canada. So now we also have some customers that are building new manufacturing facilities in Canada. So like places like Quebec and in northeastern Canada are now becoming like the I'll call them like the biggest markets for batteries and battery materials.
I'm a big hub then
It's
there.
a big hub, yeah. So a lot of the lithium companies that make the lithium that go into lithium ion batteries are based there. Companies that make different parts of the battery cell and even battery cells are starting to build up production facilities there. So it's really just a phenomenal time to be building the type of business that we're building. And I'm a firm believer that you can't wait until the flower blooms to like start preparing. So like now we're starting to see that the market is really opening up and there's a lot being built. And I think if we were starting this company today, we will have probably missed the opportunity because we wouldn't be ready for like another year. But starting this company in 2023, and now having some repetitions with our customers, having a software product that works now, we're able to now take advantage of all of these new announcements and factories that are being developed in all of these places.
What makes Digon really unique and really awesome is that a lot of the stuff is vetted already, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think you didn't talk about how that is, because I think that's super important, super critical. You don't want to go through a manufacturer, it's not vetted, it's the products poor quality, with you guys, it's all taken care of, right?
yeah, definitely. So that's like quality is a huge factor in manufacturing equipment, and I'll tell you like why it's so important. So imagine you have a manufacturing line, let's say I don't know, a press or something that's making a plastic part. And you're getting batches of plastic that come in and it's making good parts, but you get one bad batch of plastic and it makes a bad part for you. It's terrible. You need to scrap that part. To go back, there's a quality issue with the plastic. Let's get better quality plastic, right? So that problem is relatively easy to fix because it's a material problem or a process problem. But now imagine you get a poor piece of equipment and it's not the material that's going in the equipment that's messed up, but the press itself is messed up. And so it's making bad part after bad part after bad part after bad part. Quality issues with manufacturing equipment, I cannot overstate this enough, they can like be the downfall of a company. And so these things are really important because they're not only important to the operations of the company, but they're also expensive. Like an average CNC machine, a metal cutting machine costs like $200,000. Um, An average plastic injection molding machine can cost in the low millions, or a metal press can cost in the $20 million plus range. So these things are really large capital investments that these companies are making. And so it's really important for us that they meet the quality metrics and requirements that our customers set out for them. So that's really why we do what we do. It's not just finding the suppliers, but also vetting them and making sure that they are going to execute well.
One of my favorite things that you had told me when you started Digon was, let's say you're a company founder or whatever, you don't have to worry about that too, because that's another thing to worry about.
Yeah.
Once you find a manufacturer, right, you got to worry about their
That's right.
quality and stuff, which is another headache because they could promise you something and you don't know. So you find out the hard way, and
That's
then
right.
yeah, that's a big mess.
Yeah, and it's really time consuming too because I mentioned this when I was talking about my time at Tesla, but like for most of this type of equipment, the time you place the order is not when you get that equipment. You're going to be working with that vendor for the next 6 to 18 months, sometimes even 24 months. And it would be a shame if you find out 24 months from now that they're not going to execute.
Yeah. Like, where can people find you if they want to, like, check you out, if they're interested in partnering with you?
Yeah.
Where's like the best way to find you?
All right, this is plug time. So
Yep.
you can go on our website, www.diagon.ai. You can find us on LinkedIn. We've got our LinkedIn page there. Just search for Diagon, Diagon Technologies, and or reach out to me directly. LinkedIn, I'm really active on that channel. And yeah, if you're interested, if you're manufacturing a manufacturer that's building any in-house capabilities where it's within your four walls, and you're investing in any kind of manufacturing automation or test equipment, that's an ideal customer for us. And from our experience, we're able to help a lot with customers as they're sourcing suppliers, negotiating pricing and lead times, and also executing those projects. So don't bet the house on like your in-house team doing this as their second job. You can trust us with it, and we'll be happy to help.
Well, thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, go check out Digon. Check out Will. Follow him on LinkedIn. Follow Digon as well. Dropping a lot of nuggets on LinkedIn. I see you active there too. So please go ahead and check him out. And again, awesome. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to say?
Yeah, one more thing. So we also host a community event for manufacturing and supply chain professionals. We started in the Bay Area. It's called Movers and Makers. We did our first event in December of last year. We had over 200 people show up from all different industries: aviation, aerospace, automotive, energy. And so we are hosting our second event on April 25th. It's a Thursday. And so if you're in the area interested and working in any of those industries, come through. We'd love to have you.
Awesome. And when can they get? Do they need to get tickets?
Yeah, we'll send out tickets. It'll go out on the LinkedIn
Oh,
channel.
perfect.
So,
Check out the
yeah.
LinkedIn channel then.
All right.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much, Will. Appreciate you guys. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of the Kaizen podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome, man. Hey, Will, that was great.